knowing as much as you do, what's the one thing I should know about Mason? What would that be?
The central genius of the American Revolution. Literally the intellectual wellspring of this government, properly understood, is all a series of concentric circles, all of which lead to Mason.
George Mason IV was born at Doge's Head Plantation in Stafford County in 1725 to his parents George III and Ann Thomas Mason.
George Mason was a fourth-generation Virginian, so he had long-standing roots in the Commonwealth even before his time on the earth. His parents were very wealthy. They had a large land holdings throughout Virginia and Maryland. And unfortunately, however, his father died when he was very young in a ferry accident on the Potomac River. George Mason did not have any formal schooling, but he read considerably in his uncle's library and spent a lot of time reading and learning, and at a very early age assuming some responsibility for a number of the smaller business ventures at the plantation.
Fourth or fifth of present-day Fairfax County was owned by Mason at one time, to include the property on which the Fairfax campus sits, just FYI.
On April 4th of 1750, he married his first wife, Anne Ellebeck, and moved into Gunston Hall upon its completion in 1759.
The life at Gunston Hall was really one that I think is most defined by family and by the enterprise of running the plantation and his other business holdings.
But what you sense with Gunston Hall is a man who is very comfortable in his place in Virginia, in society, in the Potomac River Valley. Certainly you would be hard-pressed to find a better place to live.
Before Mason was settling in at Gunston Hall, he ventured into politics and was elected to the Virginia House of Burgesses in 1758, representing Fairfax County until 1761.
But if you understand, he was a very private man by design. Again, that was his inclination. Participated in politics only because he had to.
But he was really one that when he saw an urgent need and he saw things of grave concern to him and the people and to Virginia, he did step up. He was very active in the pre-revolutionary movements. He and George Washington co-wrote the Fairfax Resolves, which was one of the first public expressions of grievances against the king.
As the American Revolution was ongoing, Mason would take a spot in the Virginia Convention as Fairfax County's delegate, heading to Williamsburg in 1776. It was there that he drafted the Virginia Declaration of Rights, with it being adopted on June 12th. And so it read, that all men are born equally free and independent, and have certain inherent natural rights, among which are the enjoyment of life and liberty, with the means of acquiring and possessing property, and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety.
So this is a document that is extremely important in the context of its time as an expression of rights, but also extremely important as a foundational document for a number of other countries and a number of other democracies as they've wrestled with this difficult issue.
Here you had a man who was at the very top of the social ladder, who had literally everything to lose in a revolution. And the question is why this man devoted himself to the rights of the people at a time when he was going to land perfectly fine no matter what happened. And that's with the consciousness at the time that he was in fact committing treason. And treason, the penalty for treason at that time was death. So to put everything that he had at risk for the revolution speaks to a character that we sometimes overlook.
Mason would come back to politics briefly, heading to the Philadelphia Convention in 1787. He protested the changes to the Articles of Confederation that would become the United States Constitution, arguing, among other things, that it did not have a Bill of Rights. In 1791, the Bill of Rights, based on Mason's Virginia Declaration of Rights, were ratified and placed among the Constitution that we know today.
He stayed active in public society even after more or less retiring. He was frequently invited to serve in a variety of other political posts, but turned them down. either for health reasons or for based on his preference to stay at home.
On October 7th, 1792, Mason would pass away peacefully at Gunston Hall.
What George Mason did, what George Mason wrote, what George Mason represented is really in many ways all around us. And it's an incredible opportunity to think about George Mason and what he did in completely unfettered and free ways, which I think he would appreciate.
Of all of Mason's contributions to our liberties, one stands the test of time. It has 45 words and 5 freedoms. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The First Amendment.
If Mason were around during the school's Final Four run, how do you think he'd react to all the praise and accolades?
I think in terms of the Final Four run, I think he would be enthused to see the students and others connected to George Mason so excited about the success. He clearly believed in success and excellence. I think in terms of his belief in the representation of the people, I think he would get a great deal of pride and a little bit of a good laugh about the fact that they were such an underdog and rose up over some of the larger, more prominent basketball teams. He was also a businessman, so he may have sought to get a good deal on advertising or something like that to help promote his business interests. I can imagine he would have had an entrepreneurial bent to it as well. But I think overall he would have gone along for the ride with everybody else and just enjoyed the experience. I think the most important thing, I think George Mason would be extremely gratified that an educational institution had chosen to recognize his legacy by naming itself after him.
So I would suggest if he walked in here today that he would consider this university important in terms of not so much promoting him, but the ideas that he promoted. And that would be the greatest preservation of his legacy that we could do.
I think George Mason's writings and what George Mason did in his life offer much for us to continue to think about and reflect upon and learn from. And I think he really offers an incredible lens for us to continue to, in an open, honest, tolerant way, participate in discourse about who we are and where we're going.